What did it really take to survive in old Hollywood? Not talent, not charm. Sometimes it took something far more personal. Behind the red carpets and the studio smiles was a world built on power, pressure, and whispered deals no one dared write down. These were the stars you thought were untouchable, but many had to trade their dignity just to be seen. The truth? Fame had a hidden price tag, and not everyone paid it willingly. Marlon Brando. Before Marlon Brando was Hollywood's rebel, he was just a broke dreamer sleeping on benches in Greenwich Village. Hungry and desperate, he caught the eye of director George Cukor, whose Beverly Hills mansion hosted private auditions. Brando wasn't invited to read lines, he was invited to stay the night. The next morning, he got a call from Elia Kazan, who soon cast him in a streetcar named Desire. Overnight, he became a star. But Brando had already learned Hollywood's quiet rule. Success didn't always come from talent. It came from submission to those in power. He kept a notebook filled with names of the powerful, his insurance policy. Decades later, he half-joked to reporters, "I've been with anyone who could give me a role." The room laughed. He wasn't joking. Behind the myth of cinema's greatest rebel was a man who'd already paid his price before fame found him. James Dean. James Dean arrived in Los Angeles with a dream and an empty wallet. By night, he wandered the Chateau Marmont, where auditions happened behind locked doors. Insiders said he was entered in a secret ledger of producers' favorites. His code, number 6. Mentors like Roger's bracket opened doors. But every favor came with a cost. Friends recalled Dean drinking alone, muttering, "I hate them, but I need them." He knew that without those connections, he'd be nobody. When Rebel Without a Cause made him a legend, the fame didn't heal him, it exposed him. The haunted look in his eyes wasn't acting, it was memory. By the time his Porsche crashed in 1955, Dean had already been consumed by the very machine that built him. The rebel image was never freedom, it was the mask he wore to survive. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was built, not born. His real name was Roy Fitzgerald, a quiet Midwestern kid remade by agent Henry Wilson. Their first meeting sealed a contract that was never written on paper. Universal turned Hudson into perfection press photos, fake dates, and a studio-arranged marriage to Wilson's secretary, Phyllis Gates. In public, he was the dream man. In private, he lived in fear. "They love the man on the poster," he once whispered, "not the man in the mirror." Tabloids stalked him, but the studio paid to bury evidence. Hudson's life became a performance even off camera. When he later revealed his illness in the 1980s, it shattered Hollywood's illusion of the untouchable hero. He died admired but finally honest, a man who played perfection, while quietly carrying the weight of pretending. Rudolph Valentino. Rudolph Valentino was the first Latin lover, adored worldwide in the 1920s. But before fame, he was a starving immigrant, sleeping in kitchens and dancing for tips. One night, desperate for food, he accepted an invitation to a private Greenwich Village club where wealthy patrons helped struggling artists. That night bought him a month of meals and a lifetime of fear. Even after the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse made him a star, he lived haunted by what he'd endured. He avoided certain names, begged doctors for privacy, and froze whenever old acquaintances reappeared. When he died at 31, fans wept for a romantic hero. But close friends knew he'd carried a secret that money, fame, and adoration could never erase. Hollywood sold his beauty, but it came from a man who had learned early what it cost to survive. Tab Hunter. Tab Hunter looked like the perfect American dream, handsome, polite, and sunshine ready. But behind that smile was a contract built on silence. At 19, he was caught in a Los Angeles police raid that could have ended his career before it began. The records mysteriously vanished, and the next day Warner Brothers signed him. Insiders said the cleanup came with conditions. From that moment, the studio owned his image. Hunter's every date was staged, his every interview rehearsed. He was photographed with Natalie Wood and Grace Kelly, all to maintain the illusion of the all-American heartthrob. Behind closed doors, he lived carefully, always one photo away from ruin. Years later, he said quietly, "I wasn't chosen for acting. I was chosen for being beautiful and silent. Hollywood made him its golden boy, but that glow came from the light bouncing off the bars of a gilded cage. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift had the kind of face cameras loved, vulnerable, intelligent, and endlessly expressive. Critics called him the soul of the method era, but those eyes filled with sorrow weren't just acting, they were remembering. In the mid-1940s, before his Broadway breakthrough, Clift was invited to director Joshua Logan's estate for what was described as a casual audition. The parties at Logan's house were legendary not for glamour, but for what they demanded. Servants later claimed they saw Clift leave a private room at dawn, clutching a script and fighting back tears. That script would become his first major role. Fame came quickly after A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity, but his quiet pain never left. He drank too much, worked too hard, and seemed perpetually haunted. After a devastating car accident in 1956 disfigured his face, Clift's downward spiral accelerated. He'd stare at his reflection and say, "They made me, then broke me." Friends called his final decade the slowest fade in Hollywood, yet through it all, he refused to sell out his craft. His performances stayed pure, real, and deeply human. When he passed away in 1966 at 45, the industry mourned an artist, but those who knew him understood Montgomery Clift had been carrying the cost of fame from the moment he first closed that door on Logan's estate. He wasn't just a tragic actor, he was the living proof that behind every soulful stare in classic cinema, there was often a hidden wound no studio dared acknowledge. Sal Mineo. Sal Mineo was Hollywood's golden boy gone too soon, the sensitive, wide-eyed actor who made audiences cry and rebel without a cause. But behind his soft smile was a life marked by manipulation and fear. At 16, Sal was a street-smart kid from the Bronx trying to break into acting. He was invited to what was called a private audition at a powerful producer's mansion. When he returned, his friends said he looked pale, shaken, and silent. The next day, his name appeared on the studio's casting list. Success followed fast. He earned an Oscar nomination and became one of the decade's most recognizable young stars. But insiders whispered that his rise came with invisible strings, attached unspoken debts to men who had helped him early on. By the 1970s, Mineo had become vocal about the dark side of the system. He hinted in interviews that he had letters and tapes that could expose powerful people. Days later, he was found dead outside his West Hollywood apartment, and police quickly labeled it a robbery. But his wallet was still there. What vanished was his briefcase, the one he never went anywhere without. Friends said Sal had grown paranoid in his final weeks, afraid of being silenced. Whether his fears were justified, no one could prove. But his story stands as one of classic Hollywood's eeriest cautionary tales, a young man whose fame was both his armor and his target. Sal Mineo's tragedy isn't just about how he died, it's about how the dream factory rewarded innocence with exploitation, then erased it with silence. Richard Chamberlain. In the early 1960s, Richard Chamberlain was television's golden boy, the charming Dr. Kildare, who captured America's heart every week. Mothers adored him, networks worshipped him, and sponsors lined up for his wholesome image. But behind that smile, Chamberlain lived in quiet torment. Hollywood had its rules. To be beloved, you had to be a fantasy. For Richard, that meant keeping the truth of his personal life under lock and key. An NBC employee later revealed that Chamberlain was regularly invited to private sponsored dinners, where producers mingled with executives. When the lights dimmed and the doors closed, actors weren't guests, they were part of the entertainment. Saying no wasn't an option if you wanted to keep your contract. For decades, Chamberlain lived in fear of exposure. Studios paired him with actresses for publicity, Natalie Wood one week, Jane Fonda the next. The gossip. Columns painted him as America's most eligible bachelor, but in reality, he was trapped in the role of a man who couldn't be himself. The pressure took its toll. Friends described him as restless, sleepless, pacing hotel rooms after parties, muttering, "I can't be this forever." When he finally retired, he broke his silence. "I spent 40 years not being myself," he said. It was both confession and liberation. Chamberlain's career had been spotless, his reputation untouchable, but at a cost so high it nearly erased the person behind the performer. His story is proof that sometimes the cleanest public image hides the deepest private battle. George Maharis. When Route 66 hit television in the early 1960s, George Maharis was America's rugged dream, handsome, fearless, always chasing the horizon. His popularity was explosive. Then one morning, it all vanished. In 1967, newspapers splashed a shocking headline: TV star arrested for lewd conduct. Hollywood gasped. Maharis claimed innocence, but insiders whispered that it wasn't coincidence, it was retaliation. CBS had grown tired of his defiance. He'd asked for fair pay, refused to attend late-night network parties, and hinted he was done playing by their unspoken rules. Within days, his name disappeared from casting lists. His publicists stopped returning calls. His career was over. Some close friends said Maharis once admitted he'd attended private gatherings during his early fame, lavish events where favors were traded for scripts. When he stopped participating, the safety net vanished. A columnist hinted his arrest was arranged to make an example of him. After the scandal, Maharis withdrew completely. He moved away from Los Angeles, avoiding interviews and public appearances. Those who visited said he kept photos of his glory days hidden in drawers, as if protecting them from the world that had turned its back. His final years were peaceful but lonely. Hollywood had erased his name to protect others, and in doing so, it lost one of its most magnetic talents. George Maharis wasn't just a fallen star, he was a warning. In the old studio system, disobedience came with a lifetime sentence of invisibility. Farley Granger. When Alfred Hitchcock cast Farley Granger in Rope in 1948, he became the next big thing, fresh-faced, charming, and quietly intense. But what audiences never knew was that Granger's rise came with a contract written in compromise. At 22, Farley fell under the influence of playwright Arthur Laurents, who was both mentor and gatekeeper. Their relationship blurred the lines between affection and control. Laurents dictated which roles Granger accepted, which parties he attended, even how he presented himself in public. When Farley once hesitated to take a part, Laurents reportedly told him, "You don't say no to opportunity." Granger later admitted he obeyed with tears in his eyes. On set, rumors spread that his career was being protected by powerful men. After Strangers on a Train, one assistant made a crude joke about how he got the role and vanished from the production within days. That silence said everything. Granger continued to work steadily, but Hollywood never treated him as its own. He was admired but never truly free. In his later memoir, he reflected with quiet bitterness, "If you don't let them own your body, you'll never touch the spotlight." Behind his graceful smile and gentle demeanor was a man who learned the harsh truth early that in the golden age, love was sometimes currency, and integrity could cost you everything. Farley Granger may not have reached the superstardom others did, but he walked away with his dignity intact, a quiet act of rebellion in a business built on obedience. Anthony Perkins. Anthony Perkins gave the world one of the most chilling performances in cinema history. As Norman Bates in Psycho, he embodied repression, guilt, and quiet madness. What few realized was that his real life wasn't far removed from the character's hidden torment. From the start, Perkins was under studio control. Handsome, talented, and soft-spoken, he was exactly what producers loved, pliable and profitable. But there was one rule: the image came first, the person second. Insiders whispered about his close friendship with Tab Hunter, the golden boy of Warner Brothers. They were said to be inseparable until studio executives intervened. When Hunter suggested they attend a premiere together, Perkins reportedly refused, saying, "We'd both disappear by morning." To protect his career, the studio orchestrated photo spreads with actresses and staged public romances. Perkins played along, smiling for magazines while living a double life. He wanted to be honest but feared losing everything he'd worked for. In the 1970s, he married actress Barry Berenson, and they built a quiet, private family life. But even then, the shadow of old Hollywood's secrecy hung over him. Friends said he carried years of fear that one headline could erase his career. When he passed away in 1992, the press called him mysterious and brilliant. What they didn't say was that he was also one of the many who survived a system that forced actors to choose between truth and success. Perkins's legacy isn't just about horror, it's about the real-life courage of a man who performed on and off screen for survival. Dirk Bogard. Dirk Bogard was the kind of British actor audiences adored, elegant, intelligent, with a voice that could turn any line into poetry. Films like The Servant and Death in Venice made him an icon. But what those performances didn't reveal was the quiet tragedy behind his restraint. Bogard was one of the few stars who lived his entire adult life with a partner, Anthony Forwood, his manager and constant companion. They shared a home, traveled together, and built a private world that Hollywood and London society politely ignored. The tabloids pretended Forwood was simply a loyal assistant, but insiders knew the truth. When reporters asked why he never married, Bogard would smile and say, "Some men aren't meant for domesticity." It was a carefully coded deflection. The studio feared that any open acknowledgement of his real relationship would end his career. Instead, they sold him as the sophisticated bachelor who belonged to no one. As he aged, Bogard began taking roles that mirrored his own repression. In Death in Venice, critics noted the haunting realism of his performance, a man consumed by forbidden longing. He was simply acting his truth under another name. When Forwood grew ill, Bogard dedicated himself to caring for him, refusing public appearances until his passing. In later interviews, Bogard finally hinted at his reality. "I lived life as it was given to me, quietly." He never confirmed, never denied, just existed, gracefully defiant. Dirk Bogard's story is one of dignity in a world that demanded denial. His legacy isn't only about art, it's about endurance, love, and the quiet courage to live truthfully in a time that didn't allow it. Cary Grant. Cary Grant was the dream man of the silver screen, smooth, sophisticated, the embodiment of charm. From North by Northwest to Charade, he seemed untouchable. But the legend of Hollywood's ultimate ladies' man was carefully crafted, right down to the houses he lived in. During the 1930s, Grant shared a beachfront home with fellow actor Randolph Scott. The press called it Bachelor Hall, and photographers loved it, two handsome stars sunbathing, cooking breakfast, and joking around like newlyweds. The pictures sold magazines, but behind the laughter, studio executives panicked. The image was too domestic, too intimate. Publicists quickly arranged romances to distract attention. Grant's supposed relationships with actresses became headline material, while his real life disappeared behind studio spin. He eventually married 5 times, each union shorter than the last. Insiders said it wasn't romance, it was reputation management. When gossip magazines began hinting at the truth, Grant fought back legally, filing lawsuits and winning. But the rumors never stopped. Friends later recalled how he'd speak fondly of Randolph Scott even decades after they'd gone their separate ways. Grant died in 1986, his charm undiminished, his privacy intact. To the world, he was the perfect man. To those who knew better, he was proof of how Hollywood's dream factory demanded the ultimate illusion, not just on camera, but in life itself. Cary Grant's elegance wasn't fake, but it came with a cost. He didn't just act in romantic comedies, he lived in one, written by his studio, trapped between love and legacy. Ramon Novarro. Before Rock Hudson, before Rudolph Valentino's legend faded, there was Ramon Novarro, the Catholic choir boy turned MGM megastar. By the 1920s, he was Hollywood's shining Latin idol, earning adoration worldwide. But behind that saintly image was a man crushed by the very system that made him famous. Novarro lived in constant fear. The studio built his persona around purity, parading him through church events and charity galas while hiding his private truth. Rumors spread about his discreet relationships, but MGM buried every whisper. His life became a balancing act between image and isolation. In later years, as his fame declined, Novarro's loneliness deepened. He reportedly sought companionship in secret, always wary of blackmail or exposure. Friends said he was kind, gentle, and painfully trusting. That trust eventually betrayed him. In the late 1960s, he invited 2 men to his home for company. What followed was a tragedy that stunned Hollywood. Newspapers sensationalized the incident. turning his private pain into public spectacle. The same industry that had once crowned him a king now dissected him with headlines. Novarro's passing was more than a personal tragedy, it symbolized the danger of a world where fame and fear coexisted. His story revealed how Hollywood's obsession with image destroyed the very humanity it pretended to celebrate. He was remembered as the man who followed Rudolph Valentino's footsteps. But in truth, Ramon Novarro's life was his own cautionary tale, one about loneliness, control, and the illusion of glamour. George Nader. George Nader had everything a studio could want: charm, looks, and presence. In the early 1950s, he was poised to become the next big name. But Hollywood is a game of chess, and Nader was sacrificed to protect the king. Nader was close friends with Rock Hudson, some say more than friends. When Confidential magazine prepared an expose that could have ended Hudson's career, studio executives panicked. According to insiders, they offered the press a different story about Nader. Overnight, his career crumbled while Hudson's continued untouched. Nader moved to Europe, where the industry was more forgiving. He worked steadily in smaller productions, living quietly with his lifelong companion, Mark Miller. Unlike others, he refused bitterness. Friends said he accepted what happened, calling it the price of peace. Years later, Hudson's own secrets became public, and people began revisiting Nader's story. Many realized he had been the shield, the silent guardian of another man's legend. Nader eventually retired and turned to writing, publishing a science fiction novel that mirrored his own coded experiences. He lived out his final decades in quiet contentment, far from the spotlight that once burned him. George Nader may not have become a household name, but his dignity outlasted the system that betrayed him. His story closes this list not in tragedy, but in quiet strength, a reminder that sometimes the greatest courage in Hollywood wasn't in performing, but in walking away. Old Hollywood sold dreams, but it built them on silence. These 15 men lit up screens, changed cinema, and carried secrets too heavy for their time. Today, their stories remind us that fame without freedom is just another cage lined with gold. So the next time you watch a classic, look beyond the spotlight. You might see the truth flicker in their eyes. If this history moved you, share it, subscribe, and keep their courage alive.